Have you ever caught yourself wondering which states are the most budget-friendly places to spend your retirement years? Or maybe you've looked at your finances and thought, if Social Security is all I have, where could I realistically afford to live? If questions like those have crossed your mind, then you're in the right place. This list explores the 10 best states in America for retirees who are primarily relying on Social Security income. As I mentioned in an earlier video, making ends meet on Social Security alone can be extremely difficult these days. Unless you're living with family, sharing expenses, or even living out of a vehicle, many retirees find that Social Security by itself isn't enough to cover all their costs. That's why a lot of seniors also depend on various government assistance programs to help fill the gaps. The states featured in this ranking stand out because they offer strong support systems for older residents, have favorable tax policies for retirees, and maintain a relatively affordable cost of living. Many of them either don't tax retirement income at all or place only a minimal tax burden on seniors. With that in mind, let's dive into the 10 best states where retiring on Social Security is still a realistic option. Number 10 is West Virginia. If Social Security had a favorite place to hang out, West Virginia would probably be near the top of the list. One of the biggest reasons is housing affordability. The typical home value sits around $168,000, which is far below what you'll find in many other parts of the country. The tax situation is another major advantage for retirees. West Virginia has been gradually eliminating taxes on Social Security benefits and is expected to remove them completely by 2026. For seniors living on a fixed income, that's welcome news. Combine those tax savings with a generally low cost of living, and you've got a state where a monthly Social Security check can go a lot farther than it would elsewhere. You won't need to be a financial wizard to make the numbers work. Now, let's be honest. West Virginia isn't perfect. In fact, by several measures, it ranks near the bottom in a variety of categories. But despite its challenges, it remains one of the most affordable places in America. There are still plenty of hardworking, friendly people here, and the cost of living is low enough that retirement on Social Security is actually possible. In some parts of the state, you can still find livable homes selling for less than $100,000. These aren't necessarily dream houses, and you may have to put in some work, maybe fresh paint, a few repairs, and some updates. But we're talking about real homes that are ready to live in, not abandoned buildings or places where you're battling wildlife for ownership. A big reason prices remain so low is the state's long economic struggle. Large portions of West Virginia were hit hard as coal mining declined over the years. As jobs disappeared, many residents moved away, leaving behind vacant homes and properties. The result is an abundance of affordable real estate and open land that can still be found throughout the state. The larger population centers, places like Charleston and Huntington, tend to be more expensive than the surrounding areas. Of course, what counts as a big city in West Virginia might seem pretty small compared to major metropolitan areas in other states. Once you move beyond those population centers and into the smaller towns and rural communities, affordability becomes even more noticeable. Those areas often offer beautiful mountain scenery, a slower pace of life, and communities where people still know their neighbors. It's the kind of place where a retiree can realistically make a fixed income work. One thing worth mentioning is the state's many mountain hollows, often called hollers. These small valleys have sometimes been home to the same families for generations. They're deeply rooted communities with their own traditions and way of life. If you're not from there, you'll probably find that not much happens in some of these isolated areas, and most newcomers are better off settling in towns where services and amenities are easier to access. Would I call West Virginia the ultimate retirement destination? Probably not. But if affordability is your top priority and you're looking for a place where Social Security income can still cover the basics, West Virginia deserves a serious look. Coming in at number 9 is Mississippi. Yes, Mississippi makes the list. Is it one of the most desirable states in the country? Probably not. But when the conversation shifts to affordability, Mississippi starts looking a lot more attractive. One of the biggest advantages for retirees is the state's tax structure. Mississippi is extremely friendly toward retirement income. Social Security benefits are exempt from state taxes, and so are many other forms of retirement income, including pensions. In other words, more of your money stays in your pocket instead of heading to the tax collector. Housing costs are another major selling point. The typical home value is around $186,000, which is dramatically lower than the national average of roughly $420,000. That's a huge difference, especially for someone trying to make a fixed retirement income last as long as possible. Of course, there is a catch. Affordable homes are easy to find, but finding the perfect place can take some effort. To be fair, even finding a place that checks most of the boxes may require a little searching. Not every community is going to be a winner, so choosing the right location matters. Along the Gulf Coast, you'll find some genuinely beautiful towns and neighborhoods. The scenery is great, the atmosphere is relaxed, and many retirees are drawn to the area. The downside is that prices tend to climb a bit higher there compared to the rest of the state. The areas around Meridian, where some of my family comes from, offer a different experience. It's affordable, quiet, and has that small-town southern character. There are plenty of country folks around, but that's part of the charm for many people. One thing I remember from visiting Mississippi as a teenager was floating down the Chunky River on a warm Saturday afternoon while everyone else relaxed and enjoyed the weekend. It's a slower pace of life, and some people find that very appealing. Now, I've never hidden my opinion about Mississippi. Over the years, I've said many times that it isn't one of the best states to live in overall, and I still stand by that. But this list isn't about finding the most exciting state or the state with the strongest economy. It's about finding places where retirees can realistically survive on Social Security. If you have the financial ability to choose from anywhere in the country, there are probably other states you would consider first. But if your budget is limited and Social Security is your primary source of income, Mississippi becomes a much more practical option. Think of it this way. When your choices are limited, the options that once seemed less appealing suddenly start looking a lot better. Mississippi fits that description. It may not be everyone's first choice, but for retirees focused on affordability, it can make a lot of sense. One of the state's biggest challenges is poverty. Economic opportunities are limited in many areas, and the education system struggles compared to much of the country. High-paying jobs can be difficult to find as well. However, for someone who is already retired, those concerns often carry less weight. You're no longer searching for a career, and unless you're somehow raising young children during retirement, school rankings probably aren't at the top of your priority list. Number 8 is Alabama. When it comes to keeping everyday expenses manageable, Alabama has a lot going for it. The state remains relatively affordable, and its tax policies are generally favorable for retirees. One of the biggest advantages is its low effective property tax rates, which can make a significant difference when you're trying to keep monthly expenses under control during retirement. The average home value across the state is around $229,000. Of course, that's just the statewide average. There are areas where home prices climb well above $500,000, especially in some of the more desirable markets. At the same time, there are still communities where you can find a perfectly livable house for less than $100,000. It may not be brand new, and you might need to budget for things like a roof replacement or a few upgrades within the next several years, but affordable housing options definitely exist. Alabama also offers favorable tax treatment on certain types of retirement income and pensions, making it even more attractive for seniors living on fixed incomes. What's interesting about Alabama is how much contrast you find within the state. On one hand, there are areas that struggle with poverty and limited economic opportunities. On the other hand, there's Huntsville, one of the fastest growing and most economically successful cities in the South. The state has a unique mix of challenges and strengths that makes it difficult to describe with a single label. One thing that stands out almost everywhere you go is the people. Alabama residents know how to enjoy themselves, and few things bring communities together like college football. If you've never experienced a game day tailgate in Alabama, you're missing out on a major part of the culture. The parking lots often feel like giant family reunions, mixed with a neighborhood barbecue and a holiday celebration. I remember attending an Alabama football game when I was in my mid-20s. I went with a friend, his family, and what seemed like half the people they knew. Everyone was friendly, everyone was eating, and everyone was having a good time. I was standing there with a cup of sweet tea when a woman walked up and asked what I was drinking. When I told her it was sweet tea, she laughed and said it looked like it needed some improvement. A moment later, she added a splash of bourbon and handed it back. The hospitality was memorable, and that's all I'll say about the rest of that story. Some tales are better saved for another day. I ended up attending 3 games that season, and despite all the excitement and energy, that particular encounter never happened again. It was definitely a one-time experience. Stories aside, Alabama can be a solid retirement destination for people who prioritize affordability. The key is choosing your location carefully. Not every town offers the same quality of life, and some areas are certainly more appealing than others. Generally speaking, if you stay outside the larger metropolitan areas and focus on smaller communities or rural regions, you'll find that your retirement dollars can stretch surprisingly far. Number 7 is Oklahoma. Oklahoma is one of those states that doesn't get much attention in retirement discussions. But for people living mainly on Social Security, it can be a surprisingly strong option. The biggest advantage is that it combines affordability with a fairly retiree-friendly tax structure. For starters, Oklahoma does not tax Social Security benefits. That means more of your monthly income stays in your pocket, which is exactly what retirees on fixed budgets want to hear. On top of that, housing remains reasonably priced. The typical home value is around $214,000, making home ownership far more attainable than in many parts of the country. Property taxes are another area where Oklahoma performs well. They're generally considered relatively low, and that's something many people underestimate until they retire. When regular paychecks stop coming in, every recurring expense matters, and lower property taxes can make a noticeable difference year after year. Now, let's be realistic. Oklahoma probably isn't going to top anyone's list of the most exciting states in America. But that's not the point of this ranking. If your goal is to stretch a limited retirement income as far as possible, Oklahoma deserves serious consideration. Over the years, the state has attracted a steady flow of newcomers from more expensive regions, particularly from inland areas of California. Many of them are looking for lower housing costs, less financial pressure, and a slower pace of life. While the two states are obviously very different, some people find parts of Oklahoma's open landscapes and rural character appealing for many of the same reasons they enjoyed less developed areas back home. The terrain can be rugged, wide open, and a little dusty in places. You're not moving here for ocean views or mountain resorts. What you are getting is space, affordability, and a lower cost of living. The state's two largest cities, Oklahoma City and Tulsa, are naturally more expensive than the surrounding countryside. Even so, compared to major metropolitan areas in states like California, New York, or Florida, they're still remarkably affordable. In fact, if living in a larger city is important to you, these are among the least expensive major urban areas in the country. That said, retirees trying to survive primarily on Social Security may want to look beyond the city centers. Once you move into the smaller towns and communities surrounding the larger metro areas, housing costs and everyday expenses often become even more manageable. If maximizing every dollar is the goal, Oklahoma gives you plenty of opportunities to do exactly that. It's the kind of place where a Social Security check can be stretched about as far as possible without sacrificing the basics. And when you're living on a fixed income, that's often more important than having flashy attractions or a famous zip code. Number 6 is Arkansas. Arkansas is one of those states that comes with a few asterisks. It's not usually a place I recommend across the board, but there are definitely parts of the state that deserve a closer look, especially for retirees trying to make Social Security income go further. The area that stands out the most is the northwestern corner of the state. If you're considering Arkansas, that's generally where I'd focus my search first. The state as a whole is incredibly scenic, with rolling hills, forests, lakes, and plenty of outdoor recreation. The natural beauty is hard to deny. That said, not every part of Arkansas offers the same quality of life. There are several cities and regions that many retirees might want to think carefully about before relocating to. In fact, the list of places I'd personally avoid is probably longer than the list of places I'd recommend. It's easier to point toward the areas that work well rather than trying to sort through every location that doesn't. For retirees, one of Arkansas's biggest advantages is affordability. Housing costs remain relatively low, allowing many people to own a home without exhausting their retirement budget. The typical home value sits around $216,000 statewide, though actual prices can vary significantly depending on the community. Another major benefit is that Arkansas does not tax Social Security benefits. For retirees whose primary source of income is Social Security, that's a substantial advantage. Every dollar you don't lose to taxes is a dollar that can go toward groceries, utilities, healthcare, or simply enjoying retirement. Of course, it's important to remember that not all retirement income receives the same treatment. Withdrawals from IRAs, 401ks, and other retirement accounts may still be subject to state taxation. That's something worth factoring into your financial planning if you have multiple income sources beyond Social Security. For retirees who rely mostly on their monthly Social Security checks, however, Arkansas checks many of the right boxes. The cost of living is manageable, housing remains affordable, and the tax environment is generally favorable. This is why Arkansas feels a little different from some of the other states on this list. I wouldn't tell someone to move anywhere in Arkansas without doing their homework first. But if you can settle in the Northwest region or one of a handful of other attractive pockets around the state, you may find a surprisingly comfortable place to spend your retirement years. Number 5 is Kentucky. Kentucky is a bit of an interesting state. It's known for its rolling countryside, horse racing traditions, passionate basketball fans, and a culture that appreciates a good drink and a good conversation. While it may not be the first place that comes to mind when people think about retirement destinations, it has some qualities that make it worth considering. One of Kentucky's strongest selling points is affordability. This is the kind of place where your budget has room to breathe. The typical home value is around $224,000, which is still far below what retirees will find in many other parts of the country. Kentucky also joins the growing list of states that do not tax Social Security benefits. That's a major advantage for retirees whose monthly Social Security checks make up most of their income. Every dollar you get to keep matters when you're living on a fixed budget. Interestingly, only a relatively small number of states still tax Social Security income, and that number may continue shrinking. More states have been discussing changes to their retirement tax policies in recent years. So if someone happens to be watching this several years from now, the tax landscape could look very different. I've always found the whole concept a little odd. The government sends you a Social Security payment, then some states turn around and want a portion of it back through taxes. It seems like an unnecessarily complicated process. Personally, I think retirees could use a little more support rather than less, but that's a conversation for another day. What Kentucky may lack in glamour, it often makes up for in practicality. It might not have the flashiest cities, the trendiest neighborhoods, or the most talked about attractions, but it does offer something many retirees care about even more: affordability. It's the type of place where paying for groceries, utilities, and everyday necessities doesn't feel like a monthly financial battle. That said, Kentucky is definitely a state you should experience firsthand before packing up and moving there. Honestly, that's good advice no matter where you're considering relocating. Never rely solely on rankings, internet opinions, or marketing brochures. Spend some time there, rent a place for a week or two, drive around the communities, talk to locals, and get a feel for daily life. This advice is especially important with Kentucky because it tends to be a place people either connect with or don't. The culture has its own personality, traditions, and pace of life. Some newcomers immediately feel at home, while others arrive and realize the lifestyle isn't what they expected. For certain people, Kentucky's slower pace, rural character, and strong local traditions are exactly what make it appealing. Others may find those same qualities harder to adjust to. That's why it's best viewed as a state with a distinct personality rather than a one-size-fits-all retirement destination. Number 4 is Iowa. Iowa doesn't get a lot of attention when people talk about retirement destinations, but from a financial standpoint, it quietly does a lot of things right. In particular, retirees aged 55 and older can benefit from some very favorable tax policies that make living on a fixed income much easier. One of the biggest advantages is that Iowa does not tax Social Security benefits. In recent years, the state has also become more accommodating toward other forms of retirement income, making it an increasingly attractive option for seniors looking to maximize every dollar they receive. Housing remains reasonably affordable as well. The typical home value sits at roughly $225,000, which is still well below prices found in many popular retirement states. For retirees concerned about rising costs, Iowa offers something that has become surprisingly rare these days: predictability. That's really one of the state's greatest strengths. The cost of living tends to be stable and life moves at a steady pace. When you're relying on Social Security or retirement savings, that's exactly what you want. Your monthly expenses aren't constantly jumping because the latest neighborhood trend drove housing costs through the roof or because everyone down the street suddenly decided they needed luxury amenities. Now, there is one thing that needs to be said about Iowa, and it's probably the first thing many people think of when they hear the state's name. Excitement is not exactly its strongest selling point. To put it bluntly, Iowa can feel very quiet. Some would call it peaceful. Others might call it uneventful. A few might even call it downright boring. Which category it falls into depends entirely on your personality and what you're looking for in retirement. If your ideal retirement includes trendy nightlife districts, luxury shopping, upscale entertainment, and a constant stream of events, Iowa probably isn't going to meet those expectations. You won't find the kind of social scene or high-end attractions that draw people to places like Florida, California, or larger metropolitan areas across the country. That's not necessarily a criticism. In fact, for many retirees, it's part of the appeal. A lot of people reach retirement and discover they're perfectly happy trading excitement for peace and quiet. They'd rather have lower living costs, less traffic, fewer crowds, and a slower pace of life than access to designer stores and trendy restaurants. Iowa is built for that kind of lifestyle. It's a place where stability often matters more than entertainment, and where practicality frequently outweighs glamour. Number 3 is Missouri. Missouri reminds me a lot of Arkansas in one important way. Where you choose to live matters a lot. There are definitely areas that many people would be wise to avoid, but there are also plenty of communities that make excellent places to retire, settle down, or simply enjoy a quieter pace of life. One of the reasons Missouri climbs so high on this list is its recent move to become more retiree-friendly. Beginning in 2024, the state eliminated taxes on Social Security benefits. That's a significant advantage for retirees who depend heavily on those monthly payments, and it instantly made Missouri a more attractive option for people trying to stretch a fixed income. Housing costs are another strong point. The typical home value is around $254,000, which remains comfortably below the national average. For retirees relocating from more expensive states, that can be a game changer. Many people who sell homes in higher-priced markets find they can purchase a house in Missouri and still have a substantial amount of money left over to support their retirement years. That extra financial cushion can make a huge difference. Instead of worrying about housing costs consuming most of your budget, you may find yourself with additional funds available for healthcare, travel, hobbies, or simply greater peace of mind. While Missouri isn't the cheapest state featured on this list, it strikes a balance that many retirees find appealing. You get affordability without giving up choice. Whether you prefer a larger city, a suburban neighborhood, a small town, or a quiet rural community, Missouri offers a little bit of everything. That's one of its biggest strengths. Some retirees want access to restaurants, shopping, and healthcare facilities. Others want a slower lifestyle where the loudest sound at night is a cricket outside the window. Missouri gives people the flexibility to find the environment that fits them best. There's also a broader trend worth pointing out. If you're new to the United States or simply haven't spent much time comparing regional costs of living, here's something you'll notice fairly quickly. States located along the ocean tend to be more expensive than many states in the middle of the country. It's not a perfect rule, but it holds true often enough to be useful. Coastal locations generally come with higher housing prices, higher living costs, and increased demand. Meanwhile, many inland states offer similar amenities at a lower overall cost. Take a look at the states we've covered so far: West Virginia, Mississippi, Alabama, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Kentucky, Iowa, and now Missouri. None of them sit directly on the Atlantic or Pacific coasts, and that's not a coincidence. Many of the most affordable retirement destinations are found away from the ocean, where housing and everyday expenses tend to remain more manageable. In many cases, moving inland can feel like getting an automatic discount on life. It may not be exactly 10% cheaper across the board, but the difference in housing costs, property taxes, and daily expenses can be substantial. Number 2 is Tennessee. Tennessee is widely seen as one of the more tax-friendly states in the country, and that reputation doesn't just apply to retirees. One of its biggest advantages is that it does not have a state income tax, which includes income from retirement sources like Social Security. For many people, that feels like stumbling across a discount you didn't even know existed. The average home value in Tennessee is around $323,000. Over the past decade, the state has become increasingly popular, which has pushed prices up in certain areas. Even so, it still remains relatively affordable compared to many other fast-growing states. Location inside the state matters a lot. In general, many retirees find good value and a better quality of life outside the major urban centers. Larger cities tend to be more expensive and busier, while smaller towns and suburban areas often provide a more relaxed and budget-friendly lifestyle. Tennessee isn't completely free of taxes, though. While there is no income tax, the state does rely more heavily on sales taxes. That means the way you spend money becomes more important. If most of your budget goes toward housing and essentials, this setup isn't a major issue. But if you're someone who spends heavily on shopping or discretionary items, you may feel the difference more. For retirees, however, spending patterns usually change. Most people aren't shopping the same way they did during their working years, so the higher sales tax tends to matter less than it would for younger households. Beyond finances, Tennessee offers a lot in terms of lifestyle. Outdoor enthusiasts have access to mountains, parks, and natural scenery, while cities like Nashville provide entertainment, music, and cultural activities. There are also family-friendly destinations and attractions scattered throughout the state that appeal to a wide range of people. Some areas are especially well known for tourism and recreation, while others offer a quieter, more traditional Southern lifestyle. That variety is part of what makes the state appealing to such a broad group of residents. Over the past couple of decades, Tennessee has become one of the most popular relocation destinations in the United States. People have moved there from all over the country, not just from high-cost states. One notable trend is that the state has consistently experienced population growth rather than decline, which is relatively rare. In fact, Tennessee has maintained steady growth for many decades, with only a few periods where growth slowed slightly but still remained positive. That kind of consistency is often seen as a sign of a healthy, attractive place to live. A growing population usually suggests that people are finding opportunity, affordability, or quality of life improvements worth moving for. Tennessee appears to offer a mix of all three, attracting both younger residents and retirees alike. Overall, Tennessee combines strong tax advantages, a relatively moderate cost of living, and a wide range of lifestyle options. For many Americans, it's become one of the top choices for relocation in recent years, especially for those looking to balance affordability with quality of life. And finally, number 1 is South Dakota. South Dakota stands out as the most straightforward and financially clean option on this list. One of its biggest advantages is the complete absence of a state income tax. That means retirement income, including Social Security benefits, is not taxed at the state level, allowing retirees to keep more of what they receive each month. When it comes to housing, prices are generally higher than in some of the absolute cheapest states on this list, but they are still often manageable depending on the specific area. The typical home value is around $238,000, which remains reasonable compared to national averages and many high-cost retirement destinations. What really makes South Dakota interesting is its simplicity. There aren't many complicated tax layers or confusing rules when it comes to retirement income. Financially, things tend to feel more transparent and easier to manage, which is a big plus for people living on a fixed budget. Of course, there is a trade-off. Winters in South Dakota are no joke. The cold can be intense, long-lasting, and sometimes feel like it completely takes over the state for part of the year. If you're someone who isn't bothered by harsh winter conditions, this may not be an issue, but for others, it can be a major factor in deciding whether it's the right place to retire. On the positive side, South Dakota offers plenty for people who enjoy the outdoors. Fishing, hiking, and general outdoor recreation are popular throughout the state, and the natural environment is a big draw for many residents. For retirees who appreciate a quieter lifestyle and nature-focused living, it can be especially appealing. In the end, South Dakota earns its spot at number 1 in this ranking because it combines strong tax advantages with overall affordability and a simple financial structure. While it may not be the warmest or most temperate option, it offers a level of financial ease that many retirees find hard to beat. And that wraps up the list of the 10 best states to retire on Social Security alone. The goal here was to highlight places where your money can stretch further and where retirement feels a little less financially stressful.